Chapter 13. Lucas awoke to find himself in a dark room. He twisted about, hoping to find Stephanie or Sig or any of his friends. He was quick to notice that the temperature was no longer below freezing, as it had been in the icy drifts of Antarctica, but it was still cooler than normal. He calmed his breathing to focus on any sounds that might give him a clue as to his whereabouts. His focus made him aware of a distant dripping sound. He reached down and felt dust and rock on the floor around him. He decided that a cave was the best explanation for the details he observed. He knew that it would be dangerous to move about without light. He realized that he had no pack of supplies, and none of the gadgets in his coat appeared to be in his pockets. Venturing out meant that he could easily run into a low-hanging stalactite, or worse, stumble down a sudden drop-off. He reached for his divine key, and was relieved to feel its smooth, cool surface. He smiled softly as he gripped the key, hoping that its reaction to his touch would illuminate his surroundings. To his delight, bright shafts of light flooded the cavern. It immediately confirmed his suspicions that he was in a cave. To his surprise, he saw heaps of human bones piled against a flat wall on the opposite side of the cavern. He walked closer toward them when the sound of footsteps caused him to stop in his tracks. He spun around, hoping to see who else might be there, but was unable to see anything. He went over the sound again in his mind to try and decide whether it could have been caused by an animal or some natural settling when he heard a few more footsteps. "It's all right," came a voice right behind him. He jumped with a start and whirled to see Michael standing next to him. "Michael?" whispered Lucas. "There is no need to whisper," said Michael calmly. Lucas breathed slowly and deliberately to regain his composure. "This is a vision," said Lucas. He stated it as though it were fact, but he was seeking confirmation. "That is right," said Michael. Lucas turned his attention to the cavern. "What is this place?" asked Lucas as he looked again to the walls. There was no answer, and after a moment he turned back toward Michael, only to find that he was again alone. He frowned in frustration. Even though Michael had told him almost nothing, he decided he could at least be grateful he knew he was having a vision. Being the bearer of the Key of Origins meant that this was likely a scene of something that had happened in the past. The sound of footsteps again captured his attention. He walked toward the sound with confidence. Being in a vision meant that he had a measure of protection from harm. Eventually, he realized that there were several individuals slowly exploring the cavern. As he drew closer to them, he began to perceive their voices. "Senator Wilson," said a low male voice. "You're sure this is the place?" "Yes," came a reply. The voice was not as low, but definitely male. From the tone, Lucas could tell that this Senator Wilson was very confident. After some time, they managed to make it to the wide chamber in which Lucas had awakened. The two men were both in drab coveralls, boots, and white helmets with headlamps. As expected, they seemed completely oblivious to Lucas's presence, even with the bright light emanating from his divine key. They were both slim men, but one of them was taller and more muscular. Lucas guessed the larger one was a bodyguard. The senator was clean-shaven and had dark, straight hair with a widow's peak that showed even under his helmet, and a cleft chin. He had small ears and a thin nose. The guard had a wide face with dark eyes. His chin was covered with stubble, and if he had hair, it was not visible under the helmet. "This is it," exclaimed Senator Wilson. They looked around for several minutes. "How can you tell?" asked the guard. "That heap of bones," said Senator Wilson as he pointed to a far wall in the cavern and shined his headlamp on it. He lowered his head and spoke in a somber tone. "These demon worshippers, we must put an end to this. People like William Fine and Felix Light simply cannot be permitted to continue manipulating our people." Lucas watched the expression on the senator's face. Lucas scratched his head as he tried to decide whether this politician was sincere. His eyes had narrowed and a slight frown appeared on his lips that reminded Lucas of Kirana's face when she was angry, which was frequent. "She said you would say that," said the guard in a low voice. Senator Wilson turned around in surprise. "Mr. Crenshaw?" prompted the senator, hoping for clarification. "The forces at work here are more than the Senate knows," said Mr. Crenshaw. "They are older than the Federalist States of America, and more powerful than you could imagine." "You're one of them," said Senator Wilson angrily. "You're a demon worshiper." "And by keeping the secret of this chamber hidden," said Mr. Crenshaw as he pulled out a long single-edged knife with a curved blade from a fabric sheath just inside the sleeve of his coveralls, "you can help me earn my key." "I am a senator in the Federalist States of America," said Senator Wilson in a confident tone. "I will not be intimidated by demon worshippers." "She said you would say that too," laughed Mr. Crenshaw. "Who is it that you work for?" demanded Senator Wilson. "The demon prophetess," answered Mr. Crenshaw as he lunged with his knife. Senator Wilson rushed out of the way and searched frantically for something with which to defend himself. Lucas watched in surprise as he saw the two men grapple and tumble to the dusty cave floor. Lucas was surprised at the strength and tenacity of the senator as he struggled with his companion for control of the blade. In spite of his fierce defense, after a minute of grappling, Mr. Crenshaw gained control of the knife and kicked Senator Wilson backwards. "It's over," shouted Mr. Crenshaw. "Traitor," retorted Senator Wilson. "You swore an oath to protect me." "Not before I swore to serve the demon prophetess," laughed Mr. Crenshaw. "This whole time you were a demon worshipper," exclaimed the senator. "I trusted you." "You are an idiot," said his guard, "and your term has come to an end." He lunged toward the senator with a sadistic smile on his face. It was immediately obvious that Senator Wilson did not have the strength to stop the momentum of his guard. Lucas sensed that the events of his vision were about to come to an end, and he still did not understand why he had been shown these individuals or this scene. He had not learned the location or significance of the cave. He raised an eyebrow in confusion. To his surprise, the senator spun around and kicked his guard, deflecting him further. As the guard flew through the air, his body flipped, and he landed on a sharp stalagmite that impaled him immediately. Lucas widened his eyes at the unexpected result. The senator breathed heavily as he got to his feet and looked down at his guard choking on his own blood. Senator Wilson's face had an expression of disgust. Lucas could hardly blame him after discovering that his own guard had been a plant by the demon prophetess. After taking a few moments to rest, Senator Wilson adjusted his headlamp and began exploring the cavern. He eventually came across a metal box near the heap of bones. It had been rusted around the joints a bit, but it was mostly intact. Lucas was able to make out the word archdemon that had been scraped into the lid. He returned to the corpse of his guard and retrieved the long knife, then came back to the box. He thrust the blade into the joint of the metal box to try and pry the hinged lid up and access its contents. The old metal warped under the pressure of the knife as the senator pressed against the handle. At last the box opened up, and an old leather-bound book fell out onto the dusty ground. The senator picked it up and carefully opened it. Lucas peered at it from next to him. "It's real," gasped the senator. Lucas saw a sketch of the archdemon in his crystal prison. He continued flipping pages and observed notes regarding human sacrifices. There were sketches of people chained to tables around a demon seated on a throne. The similarities to the destroyer were impossible to dismiss. Lucas's eyes grew wide as the senator flipped to pages that had diagrams of tubes and mechanical devices attached to spikes. The word infusion was scribbled in several places. The handwriting sent a shiver down Lucas's spine. "It's awful, isn't it?" came a voice next to Lucas. He turned his head to see Michael standing next to him. The moment he focused on Michael, he found that the vision of the cavern had faded away, and that they were in the frozen wastes of Antarctica. Even though he was surrounded by snow, Lucas could not feel the cold. "Why did you show that to me?" asked Lucas. "Since you began your journey with the Key of Origins, you have assumed that the Destroyer was the source of the problems in your time, Lucas Flynn," said Michael. "I can see the world is more complicated than I could have known from living in my time," said Lucas. "Yes," said Michael, "but on the other hand, you were able to accomplish many good things before you knew that it was possible to go back in time." Lucas frowned. The contradictory point made him wonder where Michael was going with his train of thought. "So why did you show that to me?" repeated Lucas. "Well, it may be wise to gather information before rushing to action," said Michael, as though Lucas had not said anything. "It is not wisdom to wait until you have all knowledge before acting." "Are you saying that we should go back in time?" asked Lucas. "Can we go back and stop Daniel from becoming the Destroyer?" Michael turned to Lucas and gave him a look of great intensity. "That is an excellent question," he said. Lucas paused, hoping for something more. Instead, his vision began to fade away. He clenched his fists in frustration. He felt no closer to an answer than when he started. As Lucas awoke, he found himself slung over Victor's shoulder, bouncing as Victor pressed on in the snow of Antarctica. "Hey!" shouted Lucas. Victor stopped and put Lucas down. Victor was clearly exhausted, but he gave a smile. "Are you all right?" he asked as he regained his breath. The others slowly paused and gathered around. "I think so," said Lucas. "Did you learn anything new?" asked Sig excitedly. Lucas shook his head. "More questions than answers," said Lucas. "How long was I out?" "A couple days," answered Victor. "Really?" he asked in surprise. Victor nodded. "Well, you didn't miss much," said Lizard. "There's no light in the cold zone anyway." Lucas's stomach growled. "Well, I did miss eating," said Lucas. "He should get food in him," said Victor. "It's settled then," said Sig with a smile. "Jonathan, are you up to cooking?" "Sure," answered Jonathan. Lizard quickly assembled another ice shelter as the group gathered together in anticipation of another meal. Once again the fuel cell heaters were ignited and slowly provided relief from the cold. Victor went around and healed the frostbite in the fingers and toes of his friends. Having provided additional supplies with the space key, Lizard sat down on the ground next to Lucas. "So what did you see in your vision?" asked Lizard. "Some politician discovering an old cave where records of archdemon worship were kept," said Lucas. "Archdemon worship?" asked Lizard. "Yeah," replied Lucas. "I'm not really sure what the point was or how it helps us yet." "I'm sure that you will figure it out eventually," said Lizard sympathetically. "I hope so," said Lucas. "It just seems like things are moving slowly right now." "You're not kidding," said Lizard. "Travel in Antarctica is not exactly fast." Lucas had not really thought about how slow their traveling must have seemed to him. He could go anywhere in the world in the blink of an eye. They were probably only going a few miles a day, and by the time they arrived at the ship, they would need to cut their way through ice before making it to ocean again. Still, Lizard was there with them, helping them at the pace they could handle. Lucas wondered if perhaps Michael might be doing something similar with him, but he could not be certain. Before long, food was served. Jonathan had favored doing simple burgers this time, much to Victor's delight. Lucas ate 2 of them and felt full. Victor was on his 3rd when a sound caused all of them to turn with a start. Jennifer was stirring. "Did we win?" she asked. The expressions of happiness melted off Sig and Victor's faces. They were going to have to relive the moment where they were forced to cast their beloved world into chaos, and that the price of stopping the destroyer from awakening the archdemon had been much greater than any of them had been prepared to handle.